Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews had seen many unusual cases during her 20-year career with the Metropolitan Police, but nothing quite prepared her for the call that came through on that crisp October morning. The voice on the other end belonged to Chief Security Officer James Wellington from Buckingham Palace, and his tone carried an urgency that immediately caught her attention. "Inspector Matthews, we have a rather delicate situation that requires your expertise," Wellington began, his words carefully measured. "It involves Queen Camilla's private wardrobe, and we need someone with your background in art crimes and historical artifacts." Sarah leaned back in her chair, intrigued. Her specialty in recovering stolen artwork and historical pieces had taken her through some fascinating cases, but royal involvement was entirely new territory.
"What exactly are we dealing with, Mr. Wellington?" "That's what we need you to determine. Can you be here within the hour?" "And, Inspector, this matter requires the utmost discretion."
An hour later, Sarah found herself walking through the private corridors of Buckingham Palace, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished marble floors. Wellington, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and an impeccable suit, guided her through a maze of hallways she had never imagined existed. The weight of history seemed to press down from every ornate ceiling and gilded frame.
"The Queen Consort discovered something unusual while organizing her wardrobe yesterday evening," Wellington explained as they walked.
She was preparing for a state dinner when she noticed something that didn't belong among her garments. Rather than handle it internally, she insisted we bring in an expert. They stopped before an elegant door marked with a small brass nameplate. Wellington knocked gently before opening it to reveal Queen Camilla herself, dressed simply in a cream-colored blouse and navy skirt, her expression serious but welcoming. "Inspector Matthews, thank you for coming so quickly," Camilla said, extending her hand. "I'm afraid we may have stumbled upon something quite extraordinary, and I wanted professional eyes on it before we proceed."
Sarah was struck by the Queen Consort's direct approach and genuine concern. "Your Majesty, I'm happy to help. Could you show me what you've found?"
Camilla led them into an adjacent room that served as her private dressing area. The space was elegantly appointed but surprisingly modest, with rows of carefully organized clothing and several antique wardrobes. In the center of the room stood a large mahogany table where a garment bag lay open, revealing what appeared to be an exquisite historical dress. "I was looking for my blue evening gown when I found this tucked behind several other pieces," Camilla explained, gesturing toward the garment. "It was wrapped in tissue paper and placed in a protective bag, but I've never seen it before in my life." Sarah approached the table, her trained eye immediately recognizing the significance of what lay before her.
The dress was clearly from another era, its silk fabric shimmering with an otherworldly quality despite obvious signs of age. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with intricate beadwork and embroidery that spoke of royal commission. "Have you touched it or moved it since discovering it?" Sarah asked, pulling on latex gloves from her kit. "Only to open the bag enough to see what it was," Camilla replied. Something about it seemed too important to handle carelessly. Sarah carefully lifted a corner of the fabric, noting the weight and texture. The silk was of exceptional quality, and the construction techniques visible in the seams suggested master craftsmanship from at least 2 centuries ago. More intriguingly, she could see what appeared to be a family crest embroidered in golden thread on the bodice. "Mr. Wellington, has there been any recent activity in this area? Any maintenance work, deliveries, or staff changes?" Sarah inquired, beginning her methodical approach. "Nothing out of the ordinary," Wellington replied, consulting his tablet. "The usual cleaning staff, but they've all been with us for years. No deliveries to this wing in the past month." Sarah photographed the dress from multiple angles before carefully examining the garment bag itself. It was modern, designed for long-term storage, suggesting someone had taken considerable care to preserve the piece. Inside the bag, she found a small, sealed envelope that had been tucked beneath the dress. "Your Majesty, there appears to be a letter or document here," Sarah said, holding up the envelope. "Would you like me to open it?" Camilla nodded, her curiosity evident. "Please, go ahead." Sarah carefully opened the envelope, revealing a handwritten note on aged paper. The handwriting was elegant, clearly from someone educated in traditional penmanship. She read aloud,
for the future queen who will understand its true value. This dress belonged to Queen Charlotte, consort of King George III. It has been in my family's care for over 200 years, but it belongs with the crown. The truth of how we came to possess it is told in the dress itself. The room fell silent as the implications of the message sank in. Sarah looked up to see both Camilla and Wellington staring at her with expressions of amazement and concern.
Queen Charlotte?
Camilla whispered. But how is that possible? How would such a significant piece end up here, and who would have had access to place it in my wardrobe?
Sarah's mind was already racing through the possibilities.
The note suggested the dress had been in private hands for generations, which could mean it was either stolen long ago or had some legitimate but forgotten provenance. The fact that someone had gone to great lengths to return it to the royal family was both mysterious and potentially significant. "We'll need to authenticate this immediately," Sarah said, carefully resealing the envelope. "If this truly is a Queen Charlotte dress, it's not just historically significant, it's invaluable. But, more importantly, we need to understand how it got here and who placed it in your wardrobe."
Wellington was already making notes on his tablet.
"I'll have security review all access records for the past month. We'll also need to interview the cleaning staff and anyone else who might have had access to this area." Camilla moved closer to examine the dress again.
"The craftsmanship is extraordinary.
You can see the care that went into every stitch. If this really did belong to Queen Charlotte, it would be one of the oldest surviving royal garments in the collection." Sarah began a more detailed examination of the wardrobe area, looking for any signs of how the dress might have been placed there. The position where Camilla had found it suggested it had been deliberately hidden, tucked behind other garments where it might not be discovered for some time.
"Your Majesty, when was the last time you accessed that particular section of your wardrobe?" Sarah asked. Camilla thought for a moment.
"I would say at least 2 weeks ago. I was looking for a particular jacket for a charity event. The blue gown I was searching for yesterday is one I wear regularly, so I would have noticed if this had been there the last few times I looked." This gave Sarah a time frame to work with. Someone had placed the dress there within the past 2 weeks, which meant the security footage might still be available. She also noted that whoever had done this had intimate knowledge of Camilla's wardrobe and habits, knowing exactly where to place something so it would eventually be found but not immediately. "The note mentions that the truth is told in the dress itself," Sarah mused aloud. "I'd like to examine it more thoroughly, but we should probably move it to a more secure location with proper conservation facilities."
Of course, Wellington agreed. "We have a conservation room in the royal collection that would be appropriate."
As they prepared to carefully transport the dress, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was just the beginning of something much larger. The mysterious appearance of what could be a priceless royal artifact, the cryptic note, and the careful way it had been preserved and returned all suggested a story that went far beyond a simple wardrobe mix-up. "There's something very deliberate about all of this," she said to Wellington as they walked through the corridors toward the conservation facility. "Someone wanted this dress to be found, and they wanted it to be found by Queen Camilla specifically. The question is why now, and what they hope to accomplish." The conservation room was a climate-controlled space equipped with specialized lighting and examination tools. Sarah laid out the dress on a padded table, and, under the bright lights, even more details became visible. The fabric had survived remarkably well, though there were signs of careful mending and restoration work that had been done over the years. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a section of the skirt where the embroidery was particularly detailed.
"These aren't just decorative patterns. This is a family tree, worked in thread.
And, here, these symbols, they look like they might be initials or monograms."
Camilla leaned in for a closer look.
"The level of detail is incredible. Whoever embroidered this was not just skilled, they were telling a story." Sarah began photographing each section of the embroidery, knowing that experts in historical textiles and royal regalia would need to examine every detail. As she worked, she noticed something that made her pause.
"Your Majesty, could you look at this section here?" Sarah indicated a portion of the bodice where the embroidery seemed to form letters.
"What do you see?"
Camilla studied the area carefully. "It looks like it could be initials. CS. And there's a date. 1761, Charlotte Sophia, Sarah said quietly.
Queen Charlotte's full name was Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, but she was sometimes known as Charlotte Sophia. The discovery sent a chill through the room. If the date was accurate, it would place the dress early in Queen Charlotte's reign, when she was still a young woman adjusting to life as Britain's queen. Wellington had been quietly documenting everything, but now he looked up from his notes. Inspector, assuming this is authentic, what are the legal implications? If it was in private hands for 2 centuries, are there ownership issues? That's exactly what we need to determine, Sarah replied. The note suggests it's been passed down through a family, but we don't know the original circumstances of how they acquired it. It could have been a legitimate gift, a reward for service, or it could have been taken improperly. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's examination revealed more intriguing details. The dress had been altered several times throughout its history, with each modification done by skilled hands. There were tiny repairs that spoke of careful preservation, and, in one seam, she found something unexpected. There's something sewn into the lining, she announced, carefully working to open a small section without damaging the fabric. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was another document. This paper was older than the note they had found earlier, written in a different hand with ink that had faded to brown. Sarah read it carefully before sharing its contents. This appears to be a letter from Queen Charlotte herself, she said, her voice filled with wonder. It's addressed to someone named Margaret Thornfield, and it's dated 1762. It thanks her for her loyal service and grants her this gown as a token of our affection and gratitude for your discretion in matters of great import to the crown. The implications were staggering. If authentic, this letter provided legitimate provenance for the dress and explained how it had come to be in private hands. Margaret Thornfield had apparently been gifted the dress by Queen Charlotte herself, and her family had preserved it for over 2 centuries before deciding to return it. But who is Margaret Thornfield? Camilla asked. And why would Queen Charlotte have given away such an elaborate dress? Sarah was already thinking through the research that would be needed. We'll need to check court records from that period, look for any mention of Margaret Thornfield in the royal household records. The letter mentions discretion in matters of great import, which suggests she was involved in something significant. As evening approached, Sarah realized they had only scratched the surface of this mystery. The dress, the letters, and the mysterious way they had appeared in Camilla's wardrobe all pointed to a story that had been carefully preserved and, finally, revealed after more than 2 centuries. Your Majesty, Sarah said as they prepared to secure the dress for the night, I believe we're dealing with something extraordinary here. This isn't just a historical artifact, it's a message from the past, and someone has gone to great lengths to ensure it reached you specifically. Camilla nodded thoughtfully. I can feel the weight of history in this dress. Tomorrow, we need to find out who Margaret Thornfield was and why her descendants felt this was the right time to return Queen Charlotte's gift to the crown. As Sarah left the palace that evening, her mind was already working through the investigation ahead. The discovery of Queen Charlotte's dress was just the beginning. The real mystery lay in understanding the story it carried and the reason someone had chosen this moment to reveal a secret that had been kept for over 200 years. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to Buckingham Palace. Sarah arrived early to find that word of the discovery had reached Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the Royal Collection's chief textile conservator, who had driven down from Windsor overnight. The conservation room buzzed with controlled excitement as experts began their detailed analysis of Queen Charlotte's dress. Inspector Matthews, this is remarkable, Dr. Hartwell said, looking up from her magnifying lens. The silk weave pattern is consistent with 18th century court dress, and the construction techniques match what we know about royal garments from that period. But, more importantly, I found something that might be a maker's mark. Sarah joined her at the examination table where a small section of the dress had been carefully turned to reveal the interior construction. Hidden in the seam allowance, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a tiny embroidered symbol. It's the mark of Thomas King, Dr. Hartwell explained. He was one of the premier dressmakers to the royal court in the 1760s. We have records of him creating several gowns for Queen Charlotte, though we thought all of them had been lost to time. While the authentication process continued, Sarah focused on the human mystery. She had spent the early morning hours researching Margaret Thornfield, and what she had discovered was intriguing. Court records from 1762 showed Margaret Thornfield listed as of Lady of the Bedchamber to Queen Charlotte, a position of significant trust and intimacy within the royal household. Wellington joined her as she reviewed the historical documents spread across a nearby table.
"What have you learned about our mysterious Margaret?"
"She was more than just a servant," Sarah replied, pointing to various entries in the court records. Ladies of the bedchamber were typically from noble families themselves. They were companions and confidants to the Queen. Margaret Thornfield appears to have served in that capacity from 1761 to 1764, then she disappears from the records entirely.
"That's curious," Wellington noted. 3 years of service, then nothing. Do we know what happened to her? Sarah had been wondering the same thing. "I've found a few clues."
There's a record of a marriage license issued in late 1764 for Margaret Thornfield and a man named Captain James Whitmore. After that, the trail goes cold, but I'm wondering if she left court service when she married. Chief Security Officer Wellington was simultaneously working on the more immediate mystery of how the dress had appeared in Queen Camilla's wardrobe. He had pulled security footage from the past month and was methodically reviewing every person who had accessed that wing of the palace. "Inspector, I think I've found something," he called out, gesturing to his laptop screen.
"Look at this footage from 8 days ago."
Sarah watched the grainy black and white video showing the corridor outside Camilla's private quarters. Most of the activity was routine, cleaning staff moving through their regular duties.
But, at 11:30 p.m., a figure appeared who didn't match any of the usual personnel.
"This person seems to know exactly where they're going," Sarah observed, watching as the figure moved purposefully down the hallway carrying what appeared to be a garment bag.
"They're wearing staff clothing, but their movement suggests familiarity with the palace layout."
Wellington enhanced the image as much as possible, but the quality made facial identification difficult. "The person is definitely wearing proper identification badges, which means they either have legitimate access or very sophisticated forged credentials."
"Can you track where they went after leaving this corridor?" Sarah asked.
"That's where it gets interesting," Wellington replied, switching to another camera angle. "They exit through the service entrance, but here's the thing, they never entered through that entrance.
I've checked all the access points, and there's no record of this person entering the building that night." Sarah felt a chill of realization.
Which means they were already inside. Someone with legitimate access to the palace placed the dress in Queen Camilla's wardrobe.
The implications were troubling.
It suggested either a security breach by a trusted staff member or something more complex. Sarah knew they would need to approach this carefully, as accusations against palace staff required absolute certainty. Meanwhile, Dr. Hartwell had made another discovery that added to the mystery.
"Inspector, you need to see this," she called from across the room. "I've found something extraordinary hidden in the dress's construction."
Sarah joined her at a specialized examination station equipped with ultraviolet lighting. Under the UV rays, certain areas of the dress glowed faintly, revealing hidden text that had been sewn into the fabric with special thread.
"It's a technique sometimes used in the 18th century for secret communication," Dr. Hartwell explained.
The thread appears normal under regular light but becomes visible under specific conditions. The hidden text was in Latin, written in the same elegant script they had seen in Queen Charlotte's letter. Sarah photographed each section before calling in Dr. Marcus Webb, a Latin scholar from Cambridge who served as a consultant to the royal collection. Dr. Webb arrived within 2 hours and immediately set to work translating the hidden message. As he worked, his expression grew increasingly grave.
"This is extraordinary," he finally announced. "It's not just a message, it's a confession."
Margaret Thornfield was documenting something that happened during her service to Queen Charlotte.
"What kind of confession?" Sarah asked.
Dr. Webb read his translation aloud. "I have kept the Queen's secret these many years, though it weighs heavily upon my conscience. The prince who would be king was not born where the world believes, and I was witness to the deception that preserved the crown. Should danger ever threaten the realm from this truth, this record stands as testament to what truly occurred in the winter of 1762.
The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in.
Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized they were potentially dealing with a secret that could have significant historical ramifications. "The prince who would be king," Camilla said quietly, having arrived just in time to hear the translation. "In 1762, that would refer to the future George IV."
Dr. Webb nodded grimly.
According to this hidden message, Margaret Thornfield is claiming that the official record of Prince George's birth in 1762 contains some kind of deception.
Sarah's investigative instincts kicked in. We need to understand why someone would choose now to reveal this secret. After over 250 years, why surface this information at this particular moment?
Wellington had been quietly working on his tablet during the translation and now looked up with concern.
"Inspector, I think I may have found our answer.
I've been checking recent staff activities, and there's one name that keeps appearing in unusual places." He turned his screen toward the group.
"Eleanor Whitmore, one of our senior housekeeping staff.
She's worked here for 15 years with an exemplary record, but, in the past month, she's been accessing areas outside her normal duties."
Sarah felt the pieces beginning to connect. Whitmore. Could she be related to Captain James Whitmore, the man who married Margaret Thornfield?
"It's quite possible," Wellington replied. "And here's what's really interesting. Eleanor Whitmore submitted her resignation yesterday morning, effective immediately. She cited family illness, but she's nowhere to be found."
The mystery was deepening.
Sarah realized they were dealing with someone who had spent years in a position of trust, quietly planning to reveal a centuries-old secret.
But what had prompted Eleanor Whitmore to act now? "Mr. Wellington, I need you to get me everything you can on Eleanor Whitmore. Employment records, background check, family information, everything.
And I want to know if she had any accomplices or if anyone else knew what she was planning."
As the afternoon progressed, the investigation took on new urgency.
The authentication of Queen Charlotte's dress was proceeding smoothly, with every expert confirming its legitimacy. But the hidden message and Eleanor Whitmore's disappearance suggested something much more complex than a simple historical discovery. Dr. Hartwell had continued her examination and found additional hidden elements in the dress. "There are more messages," she announced. "They appear to be scattered throughout the garment, like a puzzle that needs to be assembled in the correct order."
Sarah watched as the textile expert photographed each hidden section under UV light.
Gradually, a more complete picture emerged of what Margaret Thornfield had documented. "She's describing specific events from the winter of 1762, Dr. Webb translated as each new section was revealed.
There are mentions of secret trips, falsified records, and a conspiracy involving several members of the royal household."
Queen Camilla had remained throughout the afternoon, clearly fascinated by the unfolding mystery but also concerned about the potential implications.
If Margaret Thornfield's claims are true, what does that mean for the historical record?
And, more importantly, why would someone risk their career and potentially face serious legal consequences to reveal this now?
Sarah had been pondering the same question. "Your Majesty, I think the timing might be significant. Is there anything happening currently that might make this historical information particularly relevant?" Camilla considered this carefully.
"There are always historians and genealogists researching the royal family tree, but nothing specific comes to mind."
"Unless."
She paused, thinking. "There was a recent documentary proposal about the Georgian period that the royal collection declined to support. The researchers were particularly interested in succession questions and legitimacy issues."
Wellington looked up from his research. "Inspector, I found Eleanor Whitmore's address and some family information.
She lives alone in a cottage about an hour from London, and, according to her employment file, she listed her great-great-grandmother as Margaret Thornfield." The connection was confirmed. Eleanor Whitmore was indeed a descendant of Margaret Thornfield, and she had spent 15 years working in the palace, probably watching and waiting for the right moment to fulfill what she saw as a family obligation. "We need to find her," Sarah said. "She's the key to understanding not just how this dress appeared, but why she felt it was important to reveal her ancestors' secret now."
As evening approached, Sarah prepared to visit Eleanor Whitmore's cottage.
The day had revealed layers of mystery that went far beyond a simple case of a misplaced historical garment. They were dealing with a family secret that had been carefully preserved for over 2 centuries, and someone had finally decided it was time for the truth to be known. "Your Majesty," Sarah said as she prepared to leave, "I want you to know that whatever we discover, we'll handle it with the utmost discretion and respect for the crown." Camilla nodded appreciatively. "I trust your judgment, Inspector. But I also believe that truth, even difficult truth, has a way of eventually coming to light. Perhaps it's time for Margaret Thornfield's story to be heard." As Sarah drove through the countryside toward Eleanor Whitmore's cottage, she reflected on the extraordinary day. A simple wardrobe investigation had uncovered a potential historical revelation that could challenge accepted royal history. The dress that had appeared so mysteriously in Queen Camilla's wardrobe was more than just an artifact, it was a message from the past, carefully preserved and, finally, delivered to someone who could ensure it received proper attention. The cottage appeared ahead, nestled among tall trees and surrounded by a garden that spoke of careful tending. Lights were on inside, suggesting Eleanor Whitmore might be home despite her sudden departure from the palace. Sarah approached carefully, knowing that the conversation ahead would determine whether this mystery would end with answers or create even more questions about the hidden history of the British royal family. The cottage door opened before Sarah could knock, revealing a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent eyes that seemed to assess Sarah immediately. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the doorway with the bearing of someone who had been expecting this visit. "Inspector Matthews, I presume," Eleanor said calmly. "I've been waiting for you. Please, come in." Sarah stepped into a cozy sitting room filled with antique furniture and family photographs spanning generations. What immediately caught her attention, however, were the books scattered across a large oak table, all dealing with Georgian history, royal genealogy, and 18th century court life. "You've been researching," Sarah observed, settling into an offered chair. "For most of my adult life," Eleanor replied, pouring tea from a service that looked like it had been in the family for generations. "Though I should say I've been continuing research that began long before I was born." Eleanor moved to an old secretary desk and returned with a wooden box that appeared to be quite old. "Inspector, what I'm about to show you will explain everything. My family has been the guardians of a secret for over 250 years, and I finally decided it was time to fulfill the promise my ancestor made." Inside the box were dozens of documents, letters, and what appeared to be journal pages, all carefully preserved and organized chronologically. Eleanor selected a leather-bound journal and opened it to pages covered with the same elegant handwriting they had seen on the letters found with the dress. "This is Margaret Thornfield's complete account of what happened during the winter of 1762, Eleanor explained. She documented everything, knowing that someday the truth would need to be revealed. Sarah examined the journal pages, noting the careful detail and consistent handwriting. Why didn't she reveal this information during her lifetime? Why keep it secret? Eleanor's expression grew solemn. Because revealing it then would have destroyed the monarchy at a time when Britain could not afford that kind of instability. But she believed that someday, when enough time had passed and the political consequences were no longer threatening, the truth should be known. And you decided that time is now? Not exactly, Eleanor replied, selecting another document from the box. Margaret left very specific instructions about when the secret should be revealed. She wrote that it should only come to light if the royal family itself had grown strong enough to withstand the truth, and if revealing it could serve the greater good rather than cause harm. Sarah leaned forward as Eleanor opened Margaret's journal to a specific page. What exactly did she witness? Eleanor took a deep breath before beginning. In December 1762, Queen Charlotte was supposed to give birth to her first child, the future George IV. But there were complications. The Queen went into labor prematurely, and the child was born dead. The implications hit Sarah immediately. But Prince George lived to become King George IV. Yes, Eleanor continued, because of what happened next. Queen Charlotte was devastated, but King George III was under enormous pressure to produce an heir. The court physicians and several trusted advisors made a decision that they believed would save the monarchy. Eleanor turned several pages in the journal, showing Sarah detailed accounts written in Margaret's careful script. There was another child born that same night. A healthy boy, born to a woman of noble birth who was unmarried and whose family wanted to avoid scandal. The arrangements were made quietly, and the switch was accomplished within hours of both births. Sarah felt the weight of this revelation settling over her. Margaret Thornfield witnessed this substitution? She was one of only 5 people who knew the truth. Queen Charlotte, King George III, the chief physician Dr. William Hunter, Lord Bute who was the king's advisor, and Margaret herself. Her job was to care for the queen during her recovery and ensure that no one else discovered what had happened. But surely others would have noticed inconsistencies? Eleanor smiled sadly. You have to understand the protocols of royal birth in that era. Very few people actually saw the royal children as infants. The substitution happened immediately after birth, before most of the court officials or other staff were allowed to see the child. Margaret's account describes how carefully it was orchestrated. Sarah studied the journal entries, noting the meticulous detail Margaret had recorded. Who was the real father of the child who became George IV? According to Margaret's records, he was Lord Frederick Somerset, a younger son of a noble family who had a brief affair with Lady Catherine Morley. Both families wanted the matter handled discreetly, and, when the royal situation arose, it seemed like a solution that would help everyone involved. The complexity of the situation was staggering. Sarah realized they were potentially dealing with a complete rewriting of royal genealogy for one of Britain's most significant monarchs. Eleanor, why are you revealing this now? After your family kept this secret for so long? Eleanor rose and walked to the window, looking out at her garden. Because I'm the last one. I never married, never had children. When I die, the secret dies with me unless I act. But, more importantly, something happened recently that convinced me the time had finally come. What happened? Eleanor returned to the desk and pulled out a modern folder. 3 months ago, I was contacted by a genealogist working on a documentary about questioned royal succession. He had discovered inconsistencies in the records surrounding Prince George's birth and was planning to make public accusations about legitimacy issues in the royal line. Sarah understood immediately. You realized that the secret was going to come out anyway, but in a way that would be damaging and incomplete. Exactly. This genealogist, Dr. Richard Harrison, had found enough circumstantial evidence to raise questions, but he didn't have the full truth. His theories were going to paint King George III and Queen Charlotte as deliberately deceiving the nation for political gain, when in reality, they were heartbroken parents who made an impossible choice to protect the monarchy during a crucial time in British history. Eleanor opened the modern folder to reveal email printouts and research notes. Dr. Harrison was planning to publish his findings in 6 months. I realized that if the truth was going to come out, it should be the complete truth, with all the context and documentation that would allow people to understand why these choices were made. Sarah was beginning to understand Eleanor's strategy. So you decided to get ahead of his revelation by presenting the full story to the royal family directly. I spent months planning how to do it properly. I needed to ensure the dress and all the documentation reached someone who would treat it with appropriate seriousness and discretion. Queen Camilla seemed like the right person because of her genuine interest in royal history and her measured approach to sensitive matters. But why the secrecy? Why not simply request a meeting and explain the situation? Eleanor's smile was rueful. Inspector, imagine trying to get an appointment to tell the royal family that one of their most famous ancestors wasn't actually related to them. I needed to present the evidence in a way that would command immediate attention and respect. Sarah had to admit the logic was sound, though the execution had certainly caused quite a stir. What about the rest of the documentation? Is there more? Eleanor nodded toward the box. Margaret documented everything. Names, dates, the arrangements made for Lady Catherine Morley, the financial considerations, even the location where the real Prince George was buried. She wanted to ensure that if the truth ever came to light, it would be the complete truth. And the hidden messages in the dress? Margaret's insurance policy. She knew that paper documents could be lost or destroyed, but a dress given as a gift by the Queen herself would be treasured and preserved.
The hidden messages were her way of ensuring the essential facts would survive even if everything else was lost.
Sarah spent the next hour examining the complete collection of documents Eleanor had preserved. The evidence was remarkably comprehensive, including letters between the conspirators, financial records showing payments to Lady Catherine Morley's family, and detailed accounts of how the substitution was carried out.
Eleanor, assuming all of this is authentic, what do you hope will happen now? Eleanor considered the question carefully.
I hope that historians will be able to present the truth in its proper context. King George III and Queen Charlotte were not villains. They were grieving parents who, along with their advisors, made a decision they believed would protect the nation. The child who became George IV grew up as a true prince and king, raised with all the education and responsibility that entailed. But, genetically, the royal line changed at that point. Yes, but the institution of monarchy continued. Some might argue that it actually strengthened the bloodline, bringing in new genetic heritage.
And, certainly, George IV's reign, whatever his personal flaws, was significant in British history.
Sarah understood that they were dealing with a revelation that could potentially rewrite history books while simultaneously demonstrating the lengths to which past generations had gone to preserve the crown during turbulent times.
There's one more thing, Eleanor said, returning to the box.
Margaret left instructions about what should be done if the secret was ever revealed. She believed that the truth should be shared publicly, but only after the royal family had time to process it and decide how to handle the historical implications.
You mean this isn't the end of the story? No, Inspector. This is really just the beginning.
Margaret's final wish was that the truth be used to demonstrate the humanity of the monarchy, to show that even kings and queens face impossible choices and sometimes have to make decisions that haunt them for the rest of their lives. As evening settled around the cottage, Sarah realized that Eleanor Whitmore had carefully orchestrated not just the revelation of a family secret, but potentially a new chapter in how the public understood the royal family's history. The dress in Queen Camilla's wardrobe had been more than just a historical artifact, it had been a carefully planned message from the past, delivered at precisely the right moment to ensure it would be received with the gravity and discretion it deserved.
Eleanor, what will you do now?
The palace will need to interview you officially, and there will be questions about your access and methods.
Eleanor nodded calmly. I'm prepared for that. I've committed no crime, and I've fulfilled a family obligation that has weighed on my conscience for years. Whatever consequences there are, I'm ready to face them.
As Sarah prepared to leave the cottage, she knew that the next 24 hours would determine how one of the most significant historical revelations in recent memory would be handled. The secret that Margaret Thornfield had carried to her grave was finally about to see the light of day, more than 2 centuries after it had first been buried in the shadows of royal necessity. The emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace convened at dawn, bringing together an unprecedented group of individuals to address what could become one of the most significant historical revelations in royal history. Queen Camilla presided over the gathering with remarkable composure, while King Charles had arrived from Scotland overnight after being briefed on the situation. Sarah sat at the long mahogany table alongside Eleanor Whitmore, who had voluntarily returned to the palace to present her evidence formally. Also present were Chief Security Officer Wellington, Dr. Hartwell from the Royal Collection, historian Dr. Webb, and Sir Anthony Morrison, the King's private secretary and chief advisor on constitutional matters.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Anthony began, we are here to address a matter of extraordinary historical significance.
Before we proceed, I want to emphasize that everything discussed in this room is subject to the Official Secrets Act. Eleanor had brought the complete collection of Margaret Thornfield's documents, which now filled several archival boxes arranged at one end of the table. Dr. Webb had spent most of the night reviewing the materials with a team of handwriting experts and historians, and his preliminary assessment was sobering. Your Majesties, Dr. Webb reported, we have conducted initial authentication tests on the documents, and they appear to be genuine 18th century materials. The handwriting analysis confirms that the journals and letters were written by the same person over a period of several years, consistent with Margaret Thornfield's documented service period. King Charles leaned forward, his expression grave.
Dr. Webb, in your professional opinion, how credible are the claims made in these documents? Sir, the level of detail is extraordinary.
Margaret Thornfield documented names, dates, specific conversations, and even financial arrangements. She included information that would have been impossible to fabricate without intimate knowledge of court procedures and the individuals involved.
Queen Camilla addressed Eleanor directly.
Ms. Whitmore, I understand you've carried this burden for many years.
But, I need to ask why you felt it was necessary to act in such a clandestine manner.
Eleanor straightened in her chair, maintaining her dignity despite the intimidating circumstances. Your Majesty, I spent months trying to find an appropriate way to approach the palace directly. But, when I learned that Dr. Harrison was planning to publish his incomplete research, I realized that dramatic action was necessary to ensure the complete truth emerged first.
Sir Anthony consulted his notes. We verified that Dr. Richard Harrison has indeed been researching Georgian succession issues.
Our preliminary investigation suggests his work could have raised serious questions without providing the full context that these documents offer.
Sarah had been asked to present her investigative findings.
Your Majesties, from a security standpoint, Ms. Whitmore's actions, while unusual, were carefully planned to cause minimal disruption while ensuring maximum attention to the evidence. Her 15 years of loyal service and clean background check support her claim that this was motivated by family obligation rather than malicious intent. The king turned his attention to the implications of the revelation itself.
Sir Anthony, constitutional question: if these claims are substantiated, what are the legal implications for the succession?
Sir Anthony had clearly anticipated this question. Sir, the legal doctrine of de facto legitimacy would apply. George IV reigned as a legitimate monarch for over a decade, and all subsequent succession has been legally valid. The circumstances of his birth, while historically significant, do not affect the legal continuity of the crown. This seemed to provide some relief to the room. Whatever the historical implications might be, the current royal line's legitimacy was not in question. Dr. Hartwell had been conducting detailed analysis of the dress and supporting materials. Your Majesties, I should note that the preservation of these documents and the dress itself represents an extraordinary feat of conservation. The Whitmore family maintained museum-quality storage conditions for over 2 centuries, suggesting a deep commitment to preserving the evidence intact. Eleanor spoke up for the first time since presenting her evidence. Your Majesties, my family never saw ourselves as keepers of a scandal. We were guardians of a human story. Margaret Thornfield's writings show the anguish that King George III and Queen Charlotte felt about their decision. They were young parents who had lost a child and were under enormous pressure to secure the succession.
Queen Camilla's expression softened.
Ms. Whitmore, reading Margaret's account, one cannot help but feel sympathy for all involved. They were facing an impossible situation with the stability of the realm at stake. King Charles had been reviewing some of Margaret's journal entries and looked up with an observation. What strikes me most is the care with which this was documented. Margaret Thornfield clearly understood the historical importance of what she was witnessing.
Dr. Webb nodded in agreement.
Sir, her writings demonstrate sophisticated understanding of the political pressures of the time. The 7 Years' War had just ended, there were ongoing tensions with France, and the monarchy needed to project strength and stability. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Patterson, the Lord Chamberlain, who had been briefed on the situation and called in for his expertise on protocol and public relations implications. Your Majesties, Lord Patterson said after reviewing the key documents, we need to consider how this information might be received publicly. The historical community will be fascinated, but we must be prepared for sensationalized coverage in the popular press.
Sarah had been thinking about this aspect throughout the morning.
Lord Patterson, MS.
Whitmore's concern about Dr. Harrison's research timeline might actually work in our favor. If we can present the complete story in a controlled manner, we can prevent the spread of incomplete or inaccurate speculation.
Eleanor leaned forward. Your Majesties, Margaret Thornfield anticipated this situation. Her final instructions, written near the end of her life, specifically addressed how the revelation should be handled. She opened one of the journals to a section near the end. She wrote that the truth should be shared openly, but with emphasis on understanding the impossible choices that were made.
She believed that revealing the humanity behind royal decisions would strengthen rather than weaken people's connection to the monarchy.
King Charles considered this perspective. Ms. Whitmore, you mentioned that Margaret Thornfield felt this story demonstrated the humanity of the crown.
How so?
Sir, because it shows that even kings and queens face heartbreak and impossible decisions. King George III and Queen Charlotte didn't act from political ambition or deception. They acted as grieving parents who believed they were protecting the nation during a crucial time. Queen Camilla had been quietly reviewing portions of Margaret's journal and looked up with evident emotion. The passages about Queen Charlotte's grief are particularly moving. One can feel her pain at losing a child while having to maintain the public appearance that all was well.
Sir Anthony brought the discussion back to practical considerations. We need to decide on our approach. Do we release this information proactively, or do we wait and respond to Dr. Harrison's research when it's published?
Lord Patterson had strong opinions on this point.
We should absolutely be proactive.
Controlling the narrative from the beginning will allow us to present the complete context and emphasize the historical significance rather than any scandal aspects.
Dr. Webb offered another perspective. From an academic standpoint, these documents represent an extraordinary primary source discovery.
The historical community would welcome their release as a contribution to scholarship rather than a controversy.
Eleanor had one more document to present. Your Majesties, there's something else.
Margaret Thornfield left a letter specifically addressed to the monarch who would eventually receive this information. She carefully extracted a sealed envelope that had remained unopened for over 2 centuries. The outside bore an inscription in Margaret's careful handwriting, "For the sovereign who will judge us with wisdom and compassion." King Charles accepted the letter with visible emotion and carefully opened the aged seal. After reading it silently, he shared its contents with the room. Margaret writes that she hopes future generations will understand that the choices made in 1762 came from love of country and dedication to the crown's stability. She asks that if this story is ever told, it be told with understanding for the impossible circumstances that forced such difficult decisions. The letter continued with Margaret's hope that revealing the truth might actually strengthen the monarchy by showing that royal families had faced and overcome extraordinary challenges throughout history.
Queen Camilla spoke first after the reading.
I believe Margaret Thornfield's wish should be honored. This story should be told, but told properly, with full context and respect for all involved. Over the following hours, the group developed a comprehensive plan for handling the revelation. They would work with respected historians to prepare a detailed academic paper, coordinate with the royal collection to create an exhibition around the dress and documents, and arrange for controlled media access to ensure accurate reporting. Eleanor would be formally interviewed for the historical record and offered a position consulting on the project to ensure her family's perspective was properly represented.
The Whitmore family's centuries of guardianship would be recognized as a remarkable act of historical preservation.
Dr. Harrison was contacted and invited to collaborate on the complete revelation rather than proceeding with his incomplete research. His initial findings, while accurate in identifying inconsistencies, will be placed in proper context through access to Margaret Thornfield's complete documentation. As the meeting concluded, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a simple wardrobe investigation. Eleanor Whitmore's carefully planned revelation had not only preserved an important historical truth but had also demonstrated the continuing evolution of the monarchy's relationship with its own history. Inspector Matthews, King Charles said as the group prepared to leave, "Your thorough investigation made it possible for us to address this situation with appropriate gravity and consideration.
The crown is in your debt."
6 months later, the revelation of Margaret Thornfield's secret was presented to the world through a carefully coordinated release involving academic journals, a BBC documentary, and a special exhibition at the Queen's Gallery. The story was received with fascination rather than scandal, with most coverage emphasizing the human drama and historical context rather than any constitutional implications. Eleanor Whitmore became a respected consultant on 18th-century royal history, finally, able to share openly the knowledge her family had preserved for so long. The dress that had appeared so mysteriously in Queen Camilla's wardrobe became the centerpiece of the exhibition, its hidden messages finally revealed to public view. Margaret Thornfield's hope that the truth would strengthen rather than weaken the monarchy proved prophetic. The revelation of King George III and Queen Charlotte's impossible choice resonated with a public that appreciated the complexity of royal responsibility and the personal costs of duty to the crown. Sarah often reflected on the case as one that demonstrated how carefully preserved truth could ultimately serve justice, even across centuries. The secret that had begun in heartbreak and necessity had finally found its proper place in history, thanks to a woman who understood that some truths are too important to die with their keepers. The investigation that had started with a simple question about a misplaced garment had uncovered one of the most remarkable family secrets in royal history, preserved through 8 generations and, finally, revealed at exactly the right moment to honor both the past and the present. Margaret Thornfield's patient faith in future wisdom had been rewarded, and her story would now take its proper place in the complex tapestry of royal history.